As it was said, my name is Petr Zlatohlávek, and I work for an NGO which is called Jagello 2000. I'll talk about that a little later, probably after we have a little break, I guess. But before we get to the agenda of what I do, what my NGO does here in the Czech Republic and abroad, I would want to tell you a little bit more about public diplomacy. This is the topic I got from the organizers. That's something that I should cover, and this is something I've been doing for the last 15 years. So I'm excited that I can share that with you. Let me sit down here. The one thing about public diplomacy that I've learned over the years that no one likes PowerPoint. And I'm the last person who likes PowerPoint, so this is pretty much the only slide I have for you today. No, there's going to be two or three more, but don't worry about it. But I believe this actually illustrates what's one of the hurdles of. Oh, you don't see me? Well, let me. If you want to see me that bad, I can move my chair so that you have a better feeling. One of the issues we have with public diplomacy, if we think about it as a way to talk to public about security and defense, is that it is a difficult and complex topic to get across. And one of the least effective ways is to have, PowerPoint presentations about security and about NATO. The good thing about that today is that you are a group that, I guess, is interested in the topic of international relations, security, defense, from what I've seen in the list of people that participate here. So that should make our job a little bit easier. Another feature that illustrates the hurdles of public diplomacy, and it's quite obvious here in the Czech Republic, is that there are very few jokes about security, military, NATO. From the couple of days you've been here, you might have noticed that Czechs have this tendency to make fun almost of everything, and there's jokes about anything. There are no jokes about NATO, or at least I don't know any. Do you have any, like, in stash that you could pull out a joke about NATO? Right? Nothing. How sad is that? I mean, what topic are we talking about if there's no jokes about it? And I'm not a joke person, so I will not be telling you jokes. However, over the years, I've heard one. I'm going to share it with you, and I quite like it, and you'll understand why I like it throughout the way when I say it, since I run the NATO Information Center here. So here goes. It's the NATO Secretary General, can be Jens Stoltenberg now, and the EU President, whoever that guy is now. And they are arguing which of those organizations is better. Is NATO better than the EU or vice versa? And of course, they cannot agree, right? Obviously. So they argue back and forth. The one thing they can agree on is that they will go and consult God and ask God which of those organizations is actually better. So the NATO Secretary General comes up to God and says, God, I know we've had some issues in NATO in the past, but we're working really hard on that. Do you think, in your opinion, that NATO will one day be the organization that everybody wants to be a part of? Everybody pays their 2% GDP for defense. We all can cooperate. We reach consensus really easily. Do you think that's going to happen? And God thinks a little, and then he says, I think so, but not in your lifetime. So, the Secretary General is a little sad, but encouraged to continue the good work. He's the hope, the light at the end of the tunnel. And then the EU president shows up and asks God the same question. God, do you think the EU is going to be an organization that actually works and its members are happy and it's a functioning organization? And now God thinks a little harder this time and says, I think so, but not in my lifetime. And since that's a crappy joke, it's a joke about NATO, but the reason I like it is that I'm from the NATO Information Center, so when I'm at an event with EU people, I like to tell that joke because we come better off from that, right? So that's another thing that's difficult, in my opinion, about the topic of defense and security, because it's so complex and serious that it's just difficult to get across to the target groups that you want to get. So when you come to a group of people and you want to talk to them about, say, NATO, and you go like, so, are you excited? Are you interested that we're going to spend the afternoon talking about security? Most of the answers you get is no, and the rest of the answers is no, not at all. So how do you work around that? What's the way to push this forward? And that's actually what I'm going to talk about today. That's in the core of public diplomacy. How do you make people interested in what you want to tell them in terms of security and defense? So with this in mind, I took the liberty and changed a little the topic of my presentation today to something like this. And do not worry, I'm not going to show you any pictures that would be even closely related to what I have on that slide. I will, however, illustrate and on those several ideas what could be used as a way to explain a difficult topic to somebody who has no idea whatsoever what you want to talk to them about. And also, this slide has also another function, that even if you drink all the beer in Mierzyn and leave after the week, you'll probably remember there was this random guy who had dick pics in his presentation on security, right? So that's my other hope. So what is the problem? What is the core of public diplomacy? What are the issues we face, and how can we overcome them? So this was a little intro, and now we get to the say, interactive stuff. When I was looking at what's going on in the defense or security area, and you've noticed these two words I'll be using a lot today, since that's what we're here to talk about. What got my attention last month was when President Obama signed into law the new decree, the new law actually curbing some of the capabilities or outreach of the NSA, of the National Security Agency. You might have heard of that. That the law, the Patriot Act, that came into force in 2001, giving the US intelligence agencies a broad range, broad spectrum of capabilities in surveillance, or as somebody says, on spying, right? And you also might have heard of a guy called Edward Snowden, right? Some of you? Yes. Good, good. So you know what he did. He stole basically classified documents from the US government and made those available to the public, right? Cyberspace or cybersecurity is very, very close to defense and security as such. And one thing these topics have in common, that probably cybersecurity is a little bit even more difficult than defense and security itself, because it involves a big deal of IT. And not very many people understand what IT is about. I mean, we all use computers and PowerPoint presentations, but how many of us actually know how it works, how it understands? So you end up calling an IT guy or trying to figure out your way around it. So what I want to do is to play a little clip from an interview with Edward Snowden. Don't focus about the topic. It's not necessarily about the topic. And there was one of the best, I think, the best interview with Edward Snowden ever. If you've seen some of them, they were, tend to be long and serious and confusing. I think the best interview that's ever been done with Edward Snowden, who is now in Russia trying to get his asylum, was done by John Oliver. You might have heard about that guy. It's a US comedian or a comedy host. He's got a segment or a program on HBO. And he flew over to Moscow to sit down with Edward Snowden to talk about what he did and why he did it and what was in his head when he was, what was it that he was trying to reach. And I believe that it's a short, it's like 6 or 7 minute segment from the half-an-hour interview. And what that segment will show you, and I want you to think about 3 questions during the segment. These are the questions. If we have answers to those questions, we have sorted out the whole debate about public diplomacy, right? So why do we actually want people to be informed about security and defense? What makes us so involved, or why do we want them to be involved? 2, and I've hinted on that already, why is it difficult? Why is it difficult to get a message across when we talk about defense and security? And 3, finally, what are the ways we can overcome that communication hurdle? And the point 3 is that that's what we do in my organization, trying to figure out how to talk to people about security and defense. After I play that segment, we'll go over the questions and talk about that. In that segment, I'll play it from a moment when John Oliver asks Edward Snowden why he actually did that. What was he trying to reach? And then they go over the individual programs of NSA and trying to figure out what each of those, you know that interview? What each of those does. So with these questions in mind, I'll try to play that video. If you have any questions or ideas that you want to mention during the time I speak, please just let me know. Don't let this be a one-way communication. I'd much rather talk about what you're interested in if we run into that during the afternoon part. So in the morning, we talked about what actually public diplomacy is. And we also tried the conceptualization, or creating a strategy for communicating a topic which is so diverse and complex, such as security. And if you recall this graph again that we talked about before the break, what Edward Snowden was trying to do from that interview, he was trying to have expert conversation with the broad public. That just, doesn't work. You have to have some steps in between in order for it to be effective, because when he gave that all information out, very few people actually knew what he was doing, why he was doing it. So it took John Oliver to explain to us what the NSA the NSA spying program was all about. Okay, so I work for Jagello 2000, which is a Czech NGO. And I have, I think, 4 slides in this part of the presentation, just to make it a little bit easier when I'm talking about the projects that we do. And I'll also have 2 small videos to introduce those projects to you. So I'm going to say what target groups we chose and how we get the message across. And if we talk about the message, the least we can say, or the least that we're trying to get across, and this is also the terminology that NATO uses, is to raise awareness of security and defense. And this is probably as good as it gets when you talk about the lay public, about a country of no matter what size. You cannot really hope for expert briefings, seminars, 2-hour programs on TV, or elaborate presentations. You can really talk about raising awareness. And by that, what I mean by that is that you actually include the idea of security and defense into your daily life. It doesn't have to mean that you think about it when you go to sleep and think, oh, what are we going to do with our defense strategy tomorrow? No, but when you hear about it in the, say, media or somewhere, you actually know what that is about. When there's a mention of NATO, so you create the connection and say, oh, okay, those are not the guys in Brussels, but that's actually us. This is our country. This type of connection we're going for. But you'll see that on when I describe the projects, and what we'll be moving down the line in this direction. We'll start with the expert ones and get to the national ones. But bear with me, there's only 4, so that's not going to be too difficult. I wanted to mention one more thing. What specifics we have in this country when it comes to public diplomacy and defense. And I want to mention 3 events or 3 years. You probably know that we entered NATO in 1999. That was the year when the Czechs, Poles, and the Hungarians entered NATO. You also might remember the year when the communism collapsed in this part of the world, and especially in our country, and that was in 1989. So there's only 10 years between the fall of communism and the Czechs entering NATO. And I'm going to tell you briefly what happened within those 10 years. In 1989, if somebody would come up to me and say, look, in 10 years, there will be no Czechoslovakia, because back then it was one country with Czechs and Slovaks, Czechoslovakia. So in 10 years, there would be no Czechoslovakia. There would be no Soviet Union. There would be no Warsaw Pact, the military alliance that we were a part of, the communist bloc. There would be no Czechoslovakia, actually. You'd be split in 2 countries. And the border of NATO would be running right through the middle, because the Slovaks entered NATO 5 years later. If you told me these 5 things, that you'd be in NATO and the border would be basically the new Iron Curtain, not the Iron Curtain, but the new border of the West would be here, and all of those things, I'd think you're crazy. Like, that cannot happen within 10 years. Well, look at us, 1999, and all of those things happened. For one life, it's a dramatic change. That's a huge change that happens within 10 years. So obviously, around the time we entered NATO, people, the general public, started to have questions, both the young and the old generation, because if you were from the older generation, you were taught all your life during the communist regime that NATO is this bad imperialistic tool of the West. They're trying to crash us. And look, all of a sudden we're part of it. So what happened that quickly that now they're not the bad guys, but they're actually the good guys? So this is one aspect that makes it specific for us here to talk about defense and security. The other one is the perception of military. For those of you from countries with communist past, you know that the military does not enjoy such a good reputation when it comes to public perception. The reason for that is that the communist regimes, more often than not, use the military as a repressive tool against their own people. So when you have an image like that for 50 years, it's really difficult to switch within 10 years to a totally new image of a, let's say, a professional army that's there to help you. They're not there to repress you, not there to put tanks in front of your house in the middle of the night. So that's another aspect that we had to take into account, because that the people were just not trusting the military, right? And the third point is that in 2002 there was the Nato Summit held in Prague. A Nato Summit, that was the first time the Nato Summit was held in a post-communist country, because we entered NATO only 3 years before that. So that was a big deal. And you know, NATO Summit is the ultimate public diplomacy event NATO has. Because we know that all of the decisions and talks could be done, you know, in a different and probably cheaper way than getting all the 28 heads together in one place for 3 days and talk. But it's just a major public diplomacy event, and people notice, and it gets into the media, and the politicians get to explain what NATO is about, and that's why we have the NATO summits. So when you put all these 3 together, it's all happening around the year 2000, which is when Jagello was founded. Do you have any guesses where the name is coming from? The Jagello 2000. I'm not asking whoever is from Poland, but
That was a Polish king.
Correct. Yes. Yes. The reason why we actually started the NGO was that we wanted to, in 1999, we wanted to promote the Czech-Polish cooperation, because when we entered NATO together, we were actually allies for the first time in like 50 years. The last time we were allies when the Jagiellonians reigned that part of Europe, and we were in that part of one kingdom. And then again, in 1999, it happened that we were allies again. And when I say allies, that's also an interesting word from our standpoint. And one thing that we need to explain to our public. Again, before 1989, during the communist regime in the Warsaw Pact, when you said allies, people mostly remembered that's the Soviet tanks in our streets occupying our cities, right? And they were like, no, we're in NATO. Allies actually are the good people now. They are not there to occupy you, but they're there to protect you in case there's an attack. So there's these little linguistic differences that we have to also think about. Anyhow, in 2000, we founded Jagalo, trying to promote the Czech-Polish cooperation, but we got a message from the Czech Minister of Foreign Affairs saying, look, there's this agenda that we want you to work on, and it's related to security, and it's related to defense. Not many NGOs were there at that time, and not many NGOs were involved in this type of operations, basically any, because no one ever did that in our country. So we thought, well, why not? Let's give it a try and see what happens. And in the 15 years that we've been developing the major projects, I believe we've reached some good results given the demand there is from the public in what we do. We also mentioned when we talked about NGOs that NGO is a good place for the government to start, especially in a country, again, like the Czech Republic, where the public is naturally distrustful, if there's such a word, towards the government. If the government tells you something, you usually go like, well, you know, you've been telling us things for 50 years, we don't really care. So one of the reasons to use an NGO is that you use somebody else to get the message across. It's not the government, they just charge you to do things on their behalf, and they give you the money for that. What we have is the credibility. You know, we want to work and give out the message that we believe in, not necessarily the government. And if we lose, like we talked about the media, that credibility, we're done. So we're very picky in what information we get out there. So let me change the slide, if I succeed. This is basically what I described to you in a nutshell. And I'm going to be talking about these four projects by which we're actually able to cover pretty much of the spectrum right here. And I'm going to stick with this slide for a second. I'll start with the NATO Information Center, which is right here. It opened, I'll sit down here, you don't really need to see that much there. It opened in 2002, which was the year of the summit. And the idea behind that, and remember this is the time where internet was barely starting in the country. And the idea behind that was to create a physical office center where people can come to and ask a question, find out about what NATO is, what it does, why are we part of it, get a brochure. So what the center does, as the name suggests, it provides information and it uses several methods. One of them is it runs a library. There's a small reference library in the NATO Information Center. And in 2002, we had a number of books. And you might recall books looked like this at that time. So it's a physical piece of paper. And this book is actually the final communiques of NATO meetings from 1975 till 1980. We got a whole shelf of those. Back then, if you wanted to find out what the communique about, you know, whatever in 1976 said, you actually had to get a physical book. It was not online. Not everything was online back then. So the questions we got from the public back then was along the lines, where do we get the info? How do we find out more? Where do we get the books? I'm writing a paper on the relation of NATO to Sweden. How can I get the brochures, the contacts I need? So there was one target group that we worked with in terms of providing information. But we're at the very beginning of the line. You can obviously address only a small group of people with a physical office. Another thing that we do under the umbrella of the NATO Information Center is run different debates, seminars, organize conferences, and the target group of that, again, is what we call the security community. So those are people who deal with security daily. That's the government, that's the NGOs, also selected media. I mean, journalists who deal with security, not media at large. And what these events do is not only create, for instance, the conference or run the conference, but also create a platform where the participants can meet. And I'm going to give you a specific example. That picture is from a conference we did in May in Prague, and we do it annually on our defense and membership in NATO, etc., etc. The keynote speaker, you cannot really tell, but I'm going to tell you. The keynote speaker was Aleksander Kwaśniewski, the former Polish president, who he came because of that conference, but he managed we managed to organize a number of side meetings for him, including with the prime minister, with the president, with members of government, with the finance minister, and these people, because he's on the left side of the political spectrum, as is the government in the Czech Republic. However, he is strongly pro-defense. He's very well aware of all the issues that are connected with this, not only in terms of budget, but also in terms of public diplomacy, etc., etc. The Czech government, and I was talking about the Czech parliamentarians, not so much. They're like, well, you know, there's more pressing issues to deal with than the military. What we were able to do is that put these people together in one room and have that debate. Somebody other than the NGOs, media, telling the representatives of our state that, look, you know, this is something you need to do. So this is the type of a networking that we also try to do. The number of people we're able to reach this way is around 1,500 per year, which is not a big group in a country of 10 million, but those are the people who deal with it. That's the security community. Those are the people that have the knowledge and interest. So it's a group that we cannot omit. The other project that we do, and if we should move the line, then I'm gonna talk about Aliante, and I'm gonna show you a short clip with just photographs, but a short clip to give you an idea what that competition is about. But first I'm going to explain it. This is a competition for high school students. And we talked about the different target groups, and we chose high schoolers as the important target group for us because of the reasons we talked about. It's a clearly identifiable group. You can reach it through the teachers, or even through some school councils in the different counties. So it's a specific group. Also, their level of knowledge is high enough for them to start registering things about defense and international relations, of course, in some basic terms. And also, these are soon to be first-time voters and our future leaders, and people who have no experience with Cold War attacks, military, etc. And also a generation, we don't have the compulsory military service anymore. So those are, again, the people who very rarely got in touch with the military. This turned out to be a successful international project. Jagello is the international umbrella organization, plus in the countries that we cooperate with, we've got national coordinators. Over the years, we worked with 19 countries. It's usually 10 countries in each given year. A total was 19. And we reached 35,000 students over the 15 years. And that's the number of students that actually participated in the competition. Why do we do that? As I mentioned at the beginning, we try to raise awareness. And how do you raise awareness about defense and security in somebody who's 15, 16, and don't really care about security? So you need to somebody said a carrot. You need to come up with a carrot that you're going to show them and tell them, look, if you get interested, we'll get you the carrot. So what does a kid of this age like to do? One of the things usually people agree on is they like to go places, travel, meet people. get new experiences. So we combine these two together, and what you can win, it's a competition, what you can win is actually a trip to one of the NATO or NATO partner countries for about 10 days or 2 weeks, where you visit the military installations of those countries, and you get to experience how it works there. So you don't only go somewhere abroad, but you also stay in the barracks, for instance. You eat meals in the canteens with the soldiers. You also get some briefings. You get to experience the culture of the country. You get to travel. It's not only about the military, you do the whole touristic package. And we had some great winners trip in the 15 years. Last year, or the 2 years back, we went to Turkey. And this picture is actually from a Turkish naval base close to Istanbul. But we traveled all around. We went from Istanbul to Izmir, to the Air Force Base in Eskişehir, and a bunch of other places within the packed 14 days. So that's something you cannot buy. If you decide, well, I want to do this, you just cannot go out to a shop and buy it or decide that you want to apply, that you would want to visit. I mean, how many times in life you get a chance to go to a naval base in Turkey? I mean, that was certainly a first time for me. We did a similar trip to the United States in 2007, like the one I mentioned in the first brief, when we brought a group of 30, 40 youngsters from, say, 10 countries, and we traveled across the states. We went to the Pentagon, we went to Colorado to the Missile Defense Command, we went to Nebraska to the National Guard, we went to Virginia to the Oceana station, and you get the experience. But this is what you win. And yes.
Do these people participate as a class, or is that
No. Like individuals. When you want to register, I'm going to explain how the competition works. You only need to register as a pair, as a couple. So you and whoever you want to get in together, you register for the competition, and then you go through it. So it's not related to classes. So the competition each year lasts for about 6 months. And it starts easy. So when you decide you want to do that and you register online, so the first rounds of the competition are really easy, like a 10-question quiz on what is NATO and this sort of thing. And you can, of course, Google everything quite easily. So those are not difficult questions. If you succeed in that, you do further rounds, like write a short essay, answer some maybe a little bit more difficult questions. And the ending of the competition is the finals. If you succeed in the previous rounds, you get to go to the finals. And the finals is a week-long intensive program, again, in one of the NATO or NATO partner countries. To that finals, usually 60 to 80 students from the participating countries get to go to. And that week is combined of not only your mental or knowledge activities, again, like you come up with a presentation, you write a little paper, but also this is designed to give you the experience of the military. So again, you stay in the barracks, you eat in the canteen. We did this finals this year in Lithuania about 2 weeks back, and it was just amazing when you get to, and Lithuania had a similar turbulent history like we had. They were part of the Soviet Union, right? So within the last 20 years, they made a big step from being part of the Soviet Union to being a country within NATO, within the EU, paying with euro. But when you come to the barracks, or when you go to the training ranges, like we did with the group, you still pretty much get the feeling this is where the Soviet military used to train. You see the barracks with the Azbuka signs on them, and the rundown streets, and still a bunch of the equipment comes from the Soviet times, just like in the case of the Czech military. How random is that for a student from, say, Canada to go to Lithuania and visit where once the Soviet soldiers used to train? And not only that, when we were there, and you probably know that at this time in Lithuania, there's a big number of NATO trainings happening. So we were at a barracks and at the training ground where there were US soldiers, where there were German soldiers, and also soldiers from Ukraine. So our kids were having a lunch in a canteen every day and breakfast, and right next to you was sitting a soldier from Ukraine. And that's the real deal, right? Because that guy will get on a plane the next day and fly back to Ukraine to war. How close to war can you get when you're 16, that you can talk to the guy and see what he does for his training? This is the type of experience that you can get within that competition. I'm going to show you a little clip what the finals is about, what tasks you have to go So this through. Is what you go through for about a week, and then you win the actual winner's trip. And of course, if you're a participant, all of this for you is free. You don't pay anything.
We can actually measure the difference in blood flow. Now, we usually do this in the laboratory.
Okay. Not everybody agrees that this is a good way how to raise awareness about NATO and security. For instance, our late First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, who is not a First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs anymore, said, well, I think this is a militarization of youth and we're not going to support your project as of now. And we're like, okay, if you think a half-day PowerPoint presentation will do a better job of attracting a 15-year-old into what security is about, well, then feel free to do that. We just think we have a bit more outreach with this. And so far, so good over the 15 years, so we're still going strong. Mm-hmm. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. We do have some follow-ups to find out how they're doing, what they are. This is not limited to one-time participation. You can participate every year if you're able to succeed. But the point is, this is not only designed to attract students who will work in international relations in the future. This is precisely designed for anybody, no matter what they decide to study. If you then turn out to be, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, this is also for you because you all will make the informed decisions about defense. We just cannot allow ourselves to educate only this part of the line over and over and over again. If you want to have a project that actually affects a larger number of your population, you need to be able to concentrate also on people who have very little or no knowledge or interest in these issues. So what you bring from this is you create the link, you have the experience, you have the knowledge, maybe you met some people, you went to a couple of military bases and you know that there is stuff and that stuff probably costs money. So when you see a news report the next day on TV talking about the Russian military, you go like, well, I met a bunch of those guys and we talked and they were nice. We don't expect any hard-hitting input, like you turned out to be this expert in military affairs. That's not what you can expect when you talk to this age group, when they're in this range. Some of them, yes, some of them have actually started working for the NGOs in their respective countries, and now they promote NATO and security, etc. But I would say more than half of them, their studies or work is not related to military and defense. I don't, yeah.
I think we need more.
Yeah, there's different views of that. I just don't think this turns you into a military geek and then you start shooting people with your gun. I don't see what the militarization aspect of that is. If this makes you more involved with the military and you go and volunteer and become a soldier, that's fine with me. As long as that works. But what it does, it attracts attention. You get, we're not talking about the 60, 80 students who get involved. We talk about the thousands each year that get involved in the first rounds of it. So they get a hint of what the security in NATO is about. And actually, this is encouraged by the teachers at the schools because obviously NATO security is one of the topics they cover. And they're like, well, we can give you a brief on NATO, or you can just try to, fill out this quiz with 10 questions on NATO. You can Google it, that's fine with us. But gives you a prize that you can reach if you're successful in that. Okay, so this is another project that we do. That's Aliante. The third one that would be the Nato Days, which is the picture in the middle, and that's our flagship event. And that's somewhere half down the line when we look at the graph again, because it's It's basically a security show. It's organized at the airport in eastern part of the country, and it's got several parts. Not only the show, the actual show at the airport, which includes air forces, but also ground forces. It's supposed to offer you a look at what tools your country or NATO has in providing security. And it's not just an air show, because if it was an air show, you'd have only the air assets, and you would call it, air show. This also involves, let's say, police. This involves the customs officers. This involves the rescuers, the paramedics. We also have a prison service there, and again, it is an international event. So it's not only the Czech military and Czech services, but also foreigners. We have a total of 30 countries that participated actively with their military in the event over the years. Each year, usually it's around 10 or 15 that come to that event that lasts over a weekend. And over that weekend, we're able to attract almost 250,000 of people who show up at the airport. This is a multi-layered event, so it's not only about people coming to airshow looking at stuff. It also involves a number of, say, debates in the communities around it with the representatives of the military, expert seminars for the ranking officers from the militaries that come to that city of Ostrava. So this is, as I said, a multi-layered project that try to target not only the experts, but also the broad public. The event is free, so you don't pay any admission, because our idea is that you're actually going to see stuff that we bought with your taxes. So why should you pay again for something you already paid for? And we all know that stuff definitely costs money. The link between an event like that and public diplomacy for us, again, is to raise awareness. If this was an air show, we would charge people a lot of money. We would call it an air show. We call it the Nato Days. This is pretty much the only event of this type in the world that's got NATO in the name of it. So the idea is to use the brand and get it into the media or for the people who come in a positive connotation, in a positive context. When NATO shows up in the news, it's usually we don't pay enough money, our soldiers were attacked and for a mission, and our military is not fulfilling its goals or something. This is one of the ways how to get the brand out there in a non-negative way. And we were surprised that this turned out to be actually a family event. You've got a lot of families who come with their kids and grandmas and granddads just to be at the airport. And I'm going to show you a short clip again so that you get a better idea of what it is about. This clip is from, 2012, so that's 2 years back. Okay, so again, some of you may call this a militarization of the public, but we believe it creates a link between, it showcases the military basically. That's why you have all these open houses for. It creates a link between you as a person, as a taxpayer, as a voter, and your military, and NATO, because you get to see a lot of allies in this event as well. So that's the third one, and the fourth one and the last one I'm gonna mention is on the next slide, right? Those goals that you mentioned are probably too high, given and we're now getting to the lower side of the spectrum. So you're talking about people with no knowledge or no interest. The basic line pretty much is the brand. Is to get the brand out to the public, both for the people who are there and into the media, with a non-negative connotation. Something that we talk about, look, we're part of this NATO alliance, and all these militaries are there in case something happens, and they've got all this equipment that they can use. And when you come out there, you can not only see that, but you can talk to the soldiers and see that those are not some random weird people. Like we had the impression of the military. If you again, and I'm talking about the Eastern Europe, right? The military was a closed off, very off limits part of community of society. This is actually intended to open up the relation. This is a place where you can come, you can talk to the soldiers, not only to the Czech ones, but also to foreigner ones. So if the people leave from that event and say, oh, okay, we've seen this event and it had like NATO in the name of it, and then they hear about NATO again, and they say, okay, we've seen a bunch of aircraft. Yeah, that's pretty much we hope for. There isn't, I don't believe there's a chance that you could get more information like you talked about, like the elaborate, we want you to believe in this, in this, in this, with this amount of people. You know, it's 250,000 people. You will not be able to brief that amount of people in your life. So this is a shortcut, basically, and nothing more, if that answers your question. Another thing that I would mention for the, and that actually goes for all of the events, I had a story, and that was very moving for me. What we do in the Czech Republic when we want to brief some students about NATO, we bring them to a military base and we do the briefing there, you know, just not to do it in a classroom. And one time we went to the Čáslav Air Force Base, which is in like 100 kilometers east of Prague, where all of our 14 Gripens are stationed. So we bring the students there, and they get to see the base, talk to the soldiers, get their briefing, go get lunch, and learn about NATO. And there's this teacher who comes up to me, and she's got these like watery eyes and looking very exhausted. I'm like, "Are you okay, ma'am? Are you fine?" And she was in like late 50s, I would guess, was her age. And she said, "I'm so glad that I'm here because my husband worked at this base for all his life. And I was never here. We were not allowed to come. So this is the first time I actually get to see where my husband worked all his life." I'm like, okay, this is some, you know, getting the military across to the public. This is a way to enable you to see what's behind the wall, what's behind the barbed wire. And I was quite pleased with that. I'm like, okay, I'm glad we could help you. So this is just a piece in the puzzle that is behind all of these projects, because you have to keep in mind that this is not a one-way street of us coming to a military and say, look, we've got this cool idea that we're going to get all these people to your base so that they can look what you're actually doing here. This is a two-way street. This is about convincing the military that they need to open up as well. It was a very, as I was saying, very closed organization for a number of years, dozens of years. So this is a two-way street that we try to work on. Okay, the last one here is a website project called natoaktual.cz, and what it is an information news portal, information news service. What we do on our webpage is provide information on NATO. You've got, you know, what it is, what it does, in Czech, in the Czech language. We also provide a short excerpts from foreign media on how they write about NATO, not only NATO countries, but also abroad. And I wanted to show you this. This is how you do media monitoring pre-internet. This is from 1997. If you wanted to know what the media wrote about NATO, you actually had to do, you know, cut the papers and paste them in a folder. This is in a time where there was no internet. So this is 2 years before we entered NATO. Not only a Czech, but also foreign media. If you guys want to take a look, just feel free to look at the media monitoring at the before internet age. But the main thing we do is news coverage of defense and security related things. Now the question is, if you have a web page like that, where you put news about security and defense, in a country with 10 million people, what's the number of hits or visits that you can hope for? I think if we were at like 100,000 a year, we would probably be really lucky. So what we decided to, and 10,000 again, you would probably only reach the people who have either some knowledge or some interest. If we want to get down here and actually reach a number of, like in last year we have 5 million hits in our news section, so that means, you know, country of 10 million, not one is one person. You know, there's some overlaps, but still a pretty good result in a small country. So when we wanted to get to that number, we thought we need to get together with the media. We need to get the media involved and somehow convince them that the news that we provide is good and worth sharing, at least in our opinion. So we started cooperation with ednes.cz, which is one of the two largest news providers in the country, a portal. And how this works, that we actually have our own section within their news portal. If you type nato.ednes.cz, you'd see our section. And we have access to their editorial system, which is like a dream for any PR agency if you're able to work with editors with any of the media. So we provide news that we write with our staff for them for free. So it doesn't cost them anything to have defense security covered because we pay for it, but what we get is the views. And how it works is once we enter our piece of news into the system, and that happens daily, if their editors like that, if their editors think this is something that they should put higher up, they put it into their, let's say, general news section. So this is the homepage of Ednes, and this actually is our news. If you clicked into that, you see that it's signed natoaktual.cz. In this way, we're able to generate these high numbers. So, but again, if you're talking about news on the internet, each news was like 4 paragraphs, maybe maximum. So the amount of information you're able to transfer is very, very small. It's basically just a piece of news. It's not like a paper or anything. But with that piece of news, you're able to reach, like with one news, I don't know, say 100,000 people that will read about something you think is important for them to see. And that turned out to be very effective. It seems to be, so far, a win-win situation. We get what we want to be read by a number of people. Ednes doesn't have to spend their money and effort on covering issues like that. And people actually do read that. And again, I wouldn't go as far as say, you know, whoever read those news now will understand all of the topics, why it's important to be a NATO ally and why we need to spend more on defense and on our military. What it does, it puts the topics on the agenda. So you have a constant stream of information, which is not only, you know, if it weren't for us, usually what gets into the news is not a positive image either of, you know, the military or NATO or whatever. Usually when there's a problem, which is okay, that's how media works. What we provide is try to get, you know, provide a new, let's say, angle of looking at things and make them interesting, even if it's not like a death of a soldier or something. Even if it's just a random exercise, we try to go there and get some good pictures and make it interesting for a wider public than just for some people who are really interested in the topic. Again, so far so good. So if you put all those 4 projects together, then the NGO with oh, this is another example of how actually the media use what the NATO Information Center does. This is from the Czech national TV. From their news channel, they put out the Atlantic Resolve, the US operation fact sheet that they actually grabbed on our webpage. So this is not only for lay public, but also for media and professionals to use that. So by the 4 projects, I wanted to demonstrate what target groups we use and what methods we use in order to get the message across. And by this time, you've noticed that if we talk about projects like the NATO Days or the website, the message we get across is pretty simple. It's not like a debate we can have here and talk about whether it was a good idea to go to Iraq or not. It's more about the brand, and when you read papers on public diplomacy, what NATO sees about their public diplomacy is mostly the brand when you want to talk about publics and millions of people. I'll also get you a handout. I'm not sure I have enough for everybody, but there's the links for the videos, and there's selected bibliography of the papers I used, and links to the projects that I talked about, and also my contact information. So you can grab one of those when we leave, and please feel free to get in touch with me. Okay, one last thing I'm gonna stress is Jagerlo has a staff of around 10 people. So we do these things, and there's around 10 of us. So I'm in charge of the NATO Information Center, and I take part in the website. And then in our free time, we just organize an air show. So that's just probably, if you have experience with NGOs, then you know that this is usually the case, how it works. You get a big bang for just $1. All right, so if there's no further questions, I hope I was able to share with you some of our experience and provide you with an angle on public diplomacy in the Czech Republic. And as I said, if you want to grab one of the handouts and get in touch with me, I'll be happy to answer any further questions that you might have. So good luck with the summer school, with the last day, and hope you guys have fun. All right, thanks.